So, hello, good evening. We're sitting here today with Spanish Foreign Minister Arantxa González Laya. Good afternoon, how are you?
Great to see you.
One of the things that struck a lot of people was that when you took office, you said in English, Spain is back. Why did you mean that, and why do you think it was necessary to convey that strong message in English?
Well, the reality is that after the 2008 economic crisis, Spain had gone into a phase of introspection. It was too preoccupied with solving the crisis, understandably so. It had to spend a lot of political energy trying to respond to the problems that the crisis had generated for the citizens in the country. And in a way, it had less energy to devote to foreign policy. So when coming into office, I wanted to say, hey, we feel confident. This is 2020. The 2008 crisis is behind us, and we want to be fully associated with foreign policy and with action around the world. That was what I meant by Spain is back. Also coupled with Spain is here to stay. It's not just it's not just a fashion to say this. We mean it profoundly. We want to be associated with shaping the responses to international affairs. That's what I meant.
How has the pandemic prevented or helped you to achieve things you wanted to achieve? To which extent the whole agenda that you had in mind before taking office has changed because of the pandemic?
Well, it's sharpened the need for public policy. And this is what foreign policy is. It's about public policy. And a pandemic, which certainly was not expected, and it's not what I meant when I said Spain is back at the beginning of 2020, has become also Spain can shape the response to COVID. And it has sharpened our desire to shape the response to COVID. And it has maybe altered a bit the order of priorities, but it has certainly sharpened also our determination to be part of the solution, and not just to passively wait for others to build a solution, but to be there, crafting the solution. Something that was incredible was the crafting of the European Union's response to the crisis, crafting the EU Recovery Fund, or crafting in the World Health Organization the response in terms of vaccines, equipment, treatment, to ensure equitable access for all countries. So, yes, we changed a bit the order of priorities, but we were more determined than ever to play our role in crafting the response to the crisis.
And still, despite the economic crisis, the pandemic, you found the time, the energy to engage in this massive exercise of producing a new foreign policy strategy. What would you say is the main message of this strategy? What would be the essential element that you would want others, when they read this lengthy, detailed strategy, retain?
First, I would want them to think that this is the product of consultations, bottom-up discussions with all stakeholders in Spain. This is not the strategy of the foreign ministry. This is the foreign policy strategy of Spain. Not even the government of Spain. It's Spain, all its actors, all its forces. Governmental forces at the national level, at the regional level, at the local level, but also of businesses, of NGOs, of civil society in the broadest terms, of universities, think tanks. So I want them to think that this is the product of a deep reflection on the side of all these forces in Spain, which it is. But I also would want them to retain one central message in this strategy. We want a globalized world. Globalization has been good for Spain, but we want this globalization to also have Spanish footprints. Not just any globalization. We want this globalization to have the the footprints, the signals that the specificities that Spain wants in this globalization. Certainly fairer, certainly more inclusive, certainly more sustainable, certainly for a country like Spain with a premium given to the European Union integration. Certainly based on a multilateralism that is attuned to today's needs, that is no longer 19th century, but it's 21st century. What we wanted through this exercise is to relate to globalization, but to ensure globalization also has the specificities that we wanted to have, the values that Spain wants globalization to represent.
It seems my reading of the strategy could be in a headline like the rescue of multilateralism. Why is multilateralism so important for an kind of an average Spaniard who has maybe not heard about this word and will now hear about this word when the strategy is approved?
It's summarized in one word, which is interdependence. The 21st century is the century of interdependence. It's not independence, it's interdependence. Whatever we do will shape the life of others. Whatever others do will shape our lives. And this is why the only possible means, the most effective means to respond to the interdependence, that's the name of the game of the 21st century, is multilateralism. Now, if multilateralism is too convoluted a word, let's call it international cooperation. Mm-hmm. And it's reinventing international cooperation that we need to think about in this 21st century. And if there was one experience that brought interdependence back to all of us, was the pandemic. The pandemic is the biggest expression that the world has been hit with in terms of interdependence. It didn't matter. We could not erect a wall high enough to prevent the virus from penetrating our countries. And we will never be safe just by vaccinating our citizens. What the pandemic has brought to us in a very sharp way, maybe in too sharp a way, is that we need to provide a response that goes beyond the national response, that goes beyond the unilateral response that used to be a bit more prevalent just a few months ago. The only answer, the most effective one, the one that will protect our citizens, is one based on international cooperation, whether this is to help us recover from the economic crisis, whether it's to ensure we are protected, that we protect our health, whether it is to protect our life on this planet. Irrespective of the area we choose, international cooperation is the most efficient and the most effective means. And this is why Spain, who is profoundly connected with the rest of the world, economically, socially, we are the home to the second most spoken language in the world. We are the second largest recipient of tourists in the world. Our companies are highly internationalized. So the most effective response for us is a stronger multilateral response. That's the heart of it.
Let's leave Europe aside for a moment to go to two very sensitive areas, which are Latin America and North Africa, in which Spain is deeply engaged historically, culturally, economically. How do you balance the need to sustain multilateralism globally, but at the same time the need to focus on these regions to which we also want to call attention about the problems and so on?
Well, it's not incompatible. The first thing to say is that you can very well articulate a multilateral response that has a specific view to regions where your bilateral relations have a value added. And this is why we concentrated bilaterally on regions or on issues where Spain has a value add. We have a value add in the southern neighborhood of the European Union by our proximity, by our history, by the connections that our businesses and our societies and our universities and think tanks have. We are very connected with finding a strategy, a policy response that works for both sides of the Mediterranean rim, works for Europe, but also works for our southern neighbors. And this is why, since I took office as foreign minister, I've devoted a lot of efforts with my European foreign ministers, my colleagues, but also with my counterparts on the southern neighborhood to craft a response, a strategy that works for both sides, that is built on the basis of co-responsibility, that helps us address climate change, that helps us boost youth employment, that helps us manage the energy transition, that helps us manage migrations, that helps us protect and promote human rights, but that does this from the basis of co-responsibility. On the side of the Latin American continent, it needs no explanation. Spain and Latin America is one and the same thing. We were born together and we live together. We breathe together. So it's just natural that Spain, like Portugal, are always this bridge in the European Union that connects Europe to Latin America, a continent which in a way shares enormous similarities with the European Union and to which we feel particularly attached.
And then the strategy spends quite a lot of time and energy speaking about democracy, promotion of democracy and human rights. Isn't it difficult to try and promote democracy abroad when sometimes our problems are at home? Is it democracy a problem when trying to approach international relations or foreign policy these days?
No, I think we have to do this with conviction, but also with humility. With conviction, because especially in Spain, we have seen also a past where there was no democracy. So we know the value of democracy, and we have to defend it with conviction. And we have to give it the value, and we have to be clear about promoting it. And again, to do this from the position of a country that has, in the not so distant past, not known democracy. But also do this with humility. I don't think this is about preaching. This is about convincing. And we can only convince others when we are convinced ourselves. So it's accepting that we also have to work to make our democracy work better. Spain is a full democracy. We are one of the 23 full democracies in this world, but full democracy doesn't mean we are a perfect democracy. We need to continue to work to improve the way democracy works in Spain. And this is why from this position of humility, we can work with others. We can promote this dialogue with others, we can share with others, we can help each other understand how we can advance better together. This is why in our relations, for example, with Latin America, we will be launching soon a series of dialogues on democracy with our sister nations from this position of conviction, but also of humility. We are not here to preach. We are all here to learn, to make democracy the bedrock of our societies, and to do this in the most solid way possible.
There's substantial space dedicated to the idea of feminist foreign policy and gender issues and so on. Does this come also from the fact that we are kind of a normative or gender superpower, Minister?
No, I think it comes from the conviction that a foreign policy has to be based on defending interests, the interests of our country, but also defending values. And the Spanish society is very attached to equality and to diversity. This is who we are. If you ask the Spanish citizens, they feel profoundly attached to the idea of equality between men and women, but also to the values of diversity, to defense of LGBTIs in Spain. But we're not perfect. So what we want to do is improve the defense of values like equality, like diversity in our country. And this is why internally we are putting a premium on policies that promote diversity and promote equality. The recently approved Spanish recovery plan has as one of the horizontal axes equality between men and women. It's a demonstration that we take it seriously internally. But it's only coherent if you do it internally that you also have a feminist foreign policy. This is what we just launched, a feminist foreign policy, which is no more and no less than ensuring that our foreign policy actions incorporate as a compass the value of equality between men and women. So to make sure that the compass, the pole is gender equality.
Okay. What is the position that Spain should seek in Europe in terms of influence? Who should we stay with or promote alliances? What is your vision about this debate that sometimes maybe it's also very convoluted?
I think we have to have ambition. We have to have the ambition of shaping the European Union, not just letting others shape and following, but we have to have the ambition of shaping European integration. We are one of the countries in the European Union where citizens feel closer and more attached to Europe. We are convinced. We came late, but we are very convinced because we have seen it work. So let's use this force to be ambitious. So my view, my vision is ambition, and also Spain as a nodal country, as a country that should strive at driving forces in Europe towards consensus. That's my vision. Now, of course, in Europe there is a big heart that beats for the European integration, is the Franco-German alliance. And this is good, and we want to be part of this heart that beats for Europe. But today this is not enough. You also have to be articulator of consensus within the wider European family. Take the example of the Migration Compact or the Southern Neighborhood. Spain has to also ensure that it builds a bridge with the Northern European countries and with the Eastern European countries. The Eastern European countries have to feel the same affinity to the Southern Neighborhood that Spain feels to the Eastern Neighborhood. That's the vision. Ambition and a nodal role in creating consensus in the European Union.
On Italy, for example, there's always this kind of rivalry about whether there is a sorpasso, whether there isn't a sorpasso, whether we should be happy for the Italians doing well or not, or we should do better than them. What do you make of this kind of rivalry in the south of Europe between Spain and Italy?
Obviously, we should want every country in the European Union to do well, including Italy, of course. But I think the European Union works better when Italy and Spain work well, when we are aligned, when we are a force. That is when the European Union works better. This is where the consensus, that is the name of the game in building the European integration, works better. So I don't see this in terms of either or. I think it works well and it works better when Spain and Italy work together. And that's my vision. And working together means obviously understanding where there's going to be a little bit of rivalry. That's fine. Competition is always good. But fundamentally, it's working together. That's when we produce better results for the European Union.
Are you going to miss something from Britain not being member of the EU? What is the thing that you would miss most? Or the thing that you would want to come back or to stay out for a while?
No, I miss British pragmatism. They've always been ultra pragmatists in international relations, and I will miss that. I will also miss this Beltancia, or this ability they had to look at the world as a globalized country that they are, and in a way Spain would feel very closely a close affinity to the UK on that, in that we have a history where we've looked at the world traditionally. Of course, not in the most recent past, but if you look at Spain in the history, like Britain in the history, we were nations that were looking at the world. I miss that, but I guess that's what British citizens have decided. So we'll try to, in any event, from this new position of the UK being a third country to the European Union, continue to have a close alliance and extremely close relationships with the UK. That's what we want, not only because this is what's in our interest, giving the big interdependence on trade, on investments, on citizens, but also because we are tremendously connected by citizens and by our people, but also by our history.
Do you envisage that the transatlantic relationship, despite not being tormentous maybe like it was in the past, will still be a bit bumpy with things that maybe we are not going to be fully aligned with Americans? What is your vision of how this transatlantic relationship is going to evolve? How is it going to evolve under Biden?
Well, there's always been bumps on the road on the transatlantic relationship. There've always been bumps. This is the anecdote. But what we are missing, and what we were missing sorely this last years, is a project, a joint project, a joint. Why were we together? A soul for the transatlantic relationship. This is what we were missing in the last years. The anecdote became the rule. There was no real compass in the relationship. And this is what we need to build together. And we have to build this from shared interests, also bearing in mind that there will be issues on which we have different interests, but most importantly, on shared values. This is why I have appreciated enormously the initial steps taken by the Biden administration to signal a commitment, a recommitment to multilateralism, a recommitment to international cooperation, a desire to work together on climate change, a desire to work together to address the pandemic. So all of this goes in the direction of building the basics for a new transatlantic relationship. And if I had to give a name to this new transatlantic agenda, I think the name could be, or the theme could be, to rehumanize globalization. We both know that globalization works well for Europe, it works well for America, but we also know that globalization needs to be rehumanized, that it needs to also address the vast inequalities that have been generated in the last decades, that it responds to the planetary boundaries, that it helps us decarbonize our economies, that it ensures that solidarity is the name of the game vis-a-vis other parts of the world that are less well off. So rehumanizing globalization is where we can build a new transatlantic relationship.
Where should we engage with China on multilateral affairs, and where should we be firm and draw kind of a line and be firm on those things that we cannot accept as because they undermine multilateralism or are incompatible with our principal interests or values?
Well, I think the world works better when we engage in a dialogue with China, when we engage with China in defining rules of the game, when we cooperate with China. It benefits everyone. And this is why I think we need to define in a space, what I call a systemic space, a space where systemic issues like climate change, like global financial stability, where international development cooperation, where international trade are governed by rules that are that ensure fair benefits to both China, Europe, or America. So there needs to be, and we need to craft those spaces of cooperation. I call them spaces that have a systemic impact. We will never be able to address climate change, there's a systemic issue, unless we engage with China, given the amount of emissions that that China is responsible for, or that Europe is responsible for, or America is responsible for. Of course, the second word is strategic. We need to look at China like China looks at us, not in political cycles of 4 or 5 years, but with a long-term view of what the relationship should look like. And the third word, obviously, is rivalry. Yes, there are areas where we do not see eye to eye. We don't see eye to eye often on human rights. We don't see eye to eye sometimes on technology or on international trade. Where we do not see eye to eye, we have to try. And where we cannot get to results, well, we would have to agree to disagree with all the consequences that this would have, especially when it's about values which are irrenounceable, at least for Spain are irrenounceable. But we should not renounce also to crafting spaces for cooperation, because at the end of the day, it's just a more efficient way of managing our international affairs.
What is the role that Europe should play should things, as they probably will, get worse every now and then between China and the US when they are competing for, this is a real sorpaso of power in the next decade or so?
Well, this is a bit the idea behind the European Union's strategic autonomy or strategic resilience, if you want, is ensuring we always try to work with partners to manage international issues where we can. We'd also be ready to act to defend our interests and our values when our partners don't want to work with us. And that's a bit maybe the experience of recent years. But our first try should always be to work with others to advance our interests and our values. We cannot be indifferent on values. We are not somewhere in the middle between China on the one side and the US on the other side. We stand for our values, and we can't be indifferent to our values. And we also stand for our interest. But especially on values, we are not indifferent to values. We cannot be somewhere in the middle. We have to stand for those values, and we have to put ourselves on the side of those who defend those values.
Well, you had a tough exchange with Minister Lavrov in the recent weeks on the situation in Spain, but more particularly the situation of Navalny, the opposition leader. Do you see, as it's been said, for example, by High Representative Borrell, Russia going down or detaching itself in an increasingly worrying way from Europe? Should we, or what should be done in that case also to contain or to prevent that drift continuing?
Well, Russia is our neighbor, and I personally think that we need to respect neighbors. We need to make sure that our neighbors respect us also. And we need to try to find the spaces where our interests and our values converge. And there are areas where they converge. If we want to fight against climate change, or protect Antarctica, or protect the Arctic, we need to work with Russia. But we also have to be clear where the limits are for unilateral policies on the side of Russia. And this is a bit what we have seen in this last months, maybe a deterioration in the relationships that Russia has with the European Union. And there we also, in a respectful way, because we always have to be respectful of others, but we also have to set clear the limits. That's a bit, yes, we have to find the spaces for collaboration. This is certainly our desire in Spain, but there are areas, for example, on Crimea, there are areas on human rights or individuals' rights, where we also will be firm.
Okay, so with this we come to an end. Maybe one last just question: if things you would want to see in 1 year time, for example, happening in terms of big success of European foreign policy or Spanish foreign policy, Is there anything that in your long list of wish list in this foreign policy strategy you would particularly see achieved? What would be the most important thing that you would want be seen if we meet together again next year?
Well, I hope that by then we have crafted and put in place a solid multilateral response to COVID. One that leaves no one behind, one that ensures that whether you are a poor country or whether you're not that poor, you're a middle income country, but you have lots of poor people within your boundaries, within your country, you have been able to respond both in terms of stimulating the economy or in terms of having your citizens have access to vaccines, or in terms of ensuring equality between men and women, reducing the gap, or in terms of protecting the planet, that we would have taken steps to craft the response to the crisis that is not like it was before, but it looks into a new future that is more equitable, that is more inclusive, and that is greener. This is what I would hope to see in 1 year, greater doses of international cooperation to build back better.
Okay, so thanks. We wish you all the success with your strategy, and of course for helping bringing Spain back in. As you said, Spain is here to stay, and count on us to help you down the road to a large presence and influence of Spain in the European Union and across the world. Good luck.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.